What does East Canada and Puerto Rico have in common? Did you ever think East Canada and Puerto Rico would be connected through commerce and even ancestry? Today, we are going to find out how Puerto Rico and Canada have been connected for over 200 years and still connected today. So, grab your drink, sit back, and enjoy. A fish cut here could eventually become dinner here. A political idea debated here could inspire reform here. A family forced to leave this place might eventually help build a new life here. Canada's East Coast and Puerto Rico. On a modern map, they seem to belong to two different worlds. But history rarely follows modern maps. History followed the sea, and for more than 3 centuries, one ocean quietly connected these two places. Through commerce, through war, migration, politics, and through ordinary people whose names have largely been forgotten. Today, we're going to remember them. Good morning and happy Sunday. I'm Josue, the spirited historian, and welcome back to another episode of Chronicles and Cocktails. If this is your first time here, every Sunday we explore history, travel, food, cocktails, and the stories that connect Puerto Rico with the rest of the world. Recently, I had the opportunity to travel across Atlantic Canada. Halifax, Sydney, Charlottetown, Corner Brook. Like most travelers, I expected beautiful scenery, historic towns, fresh seafood, and friendly people. What I didn't expect was to discover how deeply those places are connected to Puerto Rico. Not through modern tourism, not through airplanes, but through centuries of history. As always, I'm already enjoying today's cocktail. We'll talk about it later because once you've heard today's story, this drink will make perfect sense. And before we begin, if you enjoy documentaries like this, please subscribe. Become a member if you'd like to support the channel. That helps. Leave a super thanks if you enjoyed today's episode. And if you like exploring Puerto Rican history, both of my books are always linked below in the description, so go check them out. Last week, we explored how frozen water completely changed Puerto Rico. If you haven't watched episode 80, I highly recommend watching it after today's episode, because today's story continues another chapter of the same Atlantic world. Now, let's begin. History has a funny way of fooling us. We open a map and we see Canada. We see Puerto Rico. Thousands of miles apart, right? Different languages, different governments, and different climates. So naturally, we assume they developed independently. But sailors never thought that way. Neither did merchants. And neither did empires, because they weren't looking at political borders. They were looking at wind, currents, harbors, markets, opportunity. To them, distance wasn't measured in miles, it was measured in sailing days. Long before highways, railroads, or airplanes, the Atlantic became humanity's first great international transportation network. Everything moved across it: fish, wine, sugar, coffee, rum, people, ideas, military fleets, letters, newspapers, families. If you wanted to understand the early modern world, you had to understand this ocean, because almost everything depended on it. That's something I want you to remember. The same ships carrying cargo were also carrying information. Captains talked, merchants exchanged news, governments learned from one another, political ideas spread using exactly the same routes as commercial goods. That becomes very important later. Trade, ideas, war, migration, different stories, one ocean. You know, one of my favorite places during this trip was Halifax. Today, it's a vibrant Canadian city, but in the 18th century, Halifax was one of Britain's most valuable possessions. Founded in 1749, it quickly became the Royal Navy's principal base in Atlantic Canada. Its harbor could shelter entire fleets. Merchants, convoys gathered here. Warships sailed from here. Commerce passed through here. Everything depended on this harbor. Spain depended on another remarkable harbor, San Juan. Different empire, different language, different flag, exactly the same mission: protect Atlantic commerce. Because without safe harbors, merchant ships don't survive. And without merchant ships, empires don't survive. Something else struck me while walking around Halifax. History doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers. You see old warehouses, Old stone buildings, old docks. They're beautiful, right? But they're also clues because every one of those buildings existed for a reason. Trade. Trade built cities. Trade built fortunes. Trade built nations. And soon, one product would connect Halifax, Newfoundland, and Puerto Rico more than almost anything else. Believe it or not, the entire documentary starts with a fish. Not gold, not silver, not sugar, not even tobacco. Cod, bacalao. It sounds almost unbelievable today, but historians have argued that cod became one of the world's first truly global commodities. It fed Europe. It crossed the Atlantic. It sustained armies. It fed sailors and reached the Caribbean, of course. And eventually, it reached Puerto Rico. In 1497, the voyage of John Cabot brought renewed European attention to the astonishing fisheries surrounding Newfoundland. Whether Basque fishermen had already been working these waters remains debated by historians. But what happened afterward is undeniable. The fish industry exploded. English fishermen arrived. French fishermen, Portuguese, Basques, Spanish, Galicians, Dutch. Entire nations competed for access to what seemed like an endless supply of bacalao. The Grand Banks became one of the busiest fishing grounds on Earth. Why cod? Because cod had one incredible advantage. It could survive the journey. Unlike many fish, cod contains very little fat. That meant it could be heavily salted, thoroughly dried, and preserved for months without refrigeration. That changed everything. For the first time, a fish caught in freezing northern Atlantic waters could feed someone living in the Caribbean, in Puerto Rico, for example. The ocean had become a highway for food. I remember walking to a colmado. In Puerto Rico, a colmado is like a small neighborhood, often rural general store. And they sell groceries, like not everything, but the essentials, canned goods, dried fruits, and dried fish like cod. So I remember going to a colmado in a nearby barrio and seeing the hanging bacalaos. And yes, that tradition, it gets to us from the Spanish. But of course, the northern Atlantic is full of bacalao. It makes sense that this shift from European Atlantic moves to Canadian Atlantic. By the 17th and 18th centuries, cod had become far more than food. It had become business. Merchant houses financed fleets. Fishing villages became commercial ports. Ports became wealthy cities. Families built fortunes around cod. And of those markets was Puerto Rico. While researching this episode, I came across something that genuinely surprised me. Newfoundland exporters actually developed a specific grade of salt cod prepared for Puerto Rico. They called it Puerto Rico fish. Think about what that means. Puerto Rico wasn't simply buying fish. Puerto Rico had become important enough that Canadian exporters adjusted their products specifically for our market. Thousands of miles away, they knew exactly what Puerto Rican customers wanted. That's remarkable. But this wasn't a one-way voyage. Those ships didn't leave Newfoundland loaded with cod, deliver it to Puerto Rico, and sail home empty. Quite the opposite. They returned carrying some of the Caribbean's most valuable commodities: sugar, molasses, rum, salt. Every successful voyage became an exchange, not simply of products, but of economies. Here's something I absolutely love about this story. Atlantic Canada never grew sugar cane. The climate simply wouldn't allow it. Yet Atlantic Canada developed a strong rum tradition. How? Because rum traveled north. Every returning ship brought Caribbean products back into Atlantic Canadian ports. One of Newfoundland's most famous traditions today, Screech rum, exists because of centuries of trade with Caribbean. Think about that. Puerto Rico was helping shape Canadian drinking culture, while Canada was helping shape Puerto Rico's cuisine. Neither society remained unchanged. They changed both. This is one of the greatest lessons of history. Trade is never one-sided. Everyone gives something. Everyone receives something. Everyone changes. Today, bacalao feels completely Puerto Rican, and honestly, it is. Not because it originated here, because Puerto Ricans adopted it, perfected it, made it our own. One of the things I love most about Puerto Rican cuisine is that we rarely copy recipes. We transform them. We Puerto Ricanize them. And bacalao may be one of the greatest examples. Salt cod solved several problems at once. It survived long voyages. It remained edible in tropical climates. It became an affordable source of protein. It also fit perfectly within Catholic traditions during Lent and other periods when meat consumption was restricted. Generation after generation, Puerto Rican cooks created dishes that eventually became part of the island's identity. Bacalaitos, serenata de bacalao, bacalao guisado, none like my grandma's, bacalao a la vizcaína. Today, many people assume those dishes have always existed. In reality, they tell the story of an Atlantic trade network stretching thousands of miles. One thing I'd like you to think about: how many times have you eaten bacalao without wondering where it came from? I know I did, until I started researching this episode. Now, every time I see bacalao on the table, I'll probably think about Newfoundland, about fishermen, about merchant ships, about storms crossing the Atlantic. History changes the way you look at ordinary things, right? Even today, Puerto Rico continues importing cod. The barrels have become refrigerated containers. Wooden schooners have become cargo ships. But the connection remains. Centuries later, Puerto Ricans still enjoy one of Atlantic Canada's greatest exports. One thing I always try to remember is that history isn't made by products. History is made by people. I mean, it's easy to say, right? The cod trade, but behind every shipment, there were fishermen, captains, dock workers, merchants, and of course, families. People risking their lives every single season. Imagine a fisherman living in Newfoundland, months away from home, never knowing whether he'd survive another voyage. Imagine a merchant in Halifax waiting for his ships to return. Imagine a Puerto Rican family waiting for the arrival of preserved food that would help feed them. They never met one another, yet each depended on the other. That's what makes Atlantic history so fascinating. While researching this episode, something happened that made this story personal. Last year, my DNA results updated, like many Puerto Ricans and everyone on Ancestry. I expected Spain, Portugal, Africa, the usual, some Irish, indigenous ancestry. None of those surprised me. But then, I saw something unexpected. French Canadian. Only around 2%. Not a huge number, I know, but enough to make me stop. Enough to make me ask, how? Then I started talking to other people, looking at genealogy groups, comparing DNA results, and I noticed something interesting. I wasn't alone. Other Puerto Ricans were seeing French-Canadian ancestry too, including my wife, whose DNA results are a little bit different than mine's usually. That immediately raised another question. Was this connected to Atlantic Canada? Or was the answer much more complicated? This is where historians have to slow down. DNA is evidence, but DNA is not a complete explanation. It tells us populations became connected. It doesn't automatically explain the route. For that, we need history. The historical evidence points toward multiple possibilities. French-speaking families moved repeatedly throughout the Atlantic world. Some came directly from France, others from Acadia, others from Quebec. Many relocated through Louisiana. Others fled Saint-Domingue during the Haitian Revolution. Some arrived from Martinique, Guadeloupe, or other French Caribbean colonies. Then came another important moment. The Royal Decree of Graces of 1815. Spain actively encouraged Catholic immigration into Puerto Rico, French settlers, Corsicans, other Europeans. Many accepted the invitation. They established farms, coffee plantations, businesses, families. Their descendants remain part of Puerto Rico today. So, am I saying my French Canadian ancestry came directly from Quebec? No. I can't honestly say that. Maybe it did. Maybe it came through Louisiana, which would be really cool for me. Maybe Saint Domingue, which is probably the most accurate. Maybe another branch entirely. That's why I find this so fascinating. History gives us possibilities. Genealogy gives us clues and explanations. Now, we need documents to connect them all. And I have a feeling that's another episode waiting to happen. Let's step back for a moment. What started as a documentary about cod became something much bigger. Fish, rum, politics, migration, DNA, war. At first, they seemed unrelated, but every one of them followed exactly the same maritime network. And suddenly, Canada and Puerto Rico don't seem nearly as far apart anymore. History often teaches us individual stories. The history of Canada, the history of Puerto Rico, the history of Spain, and the history of Britain. But the ocean ignores those categories. The ocean connects stories. And that's exactly what we've been uncovering today. Now, let's prepare the cocktail. So I decided to go with the Canadian blueberry maple syrup to capture the taste of Eastern Canada. Muddle fresh blueberries. And I added 1769 Distillery Canadian whiskey. And instead of maple syrup, I added sweet maple Canadian whiskey. Then I balanced it with a tart lime and lemon mix. The maple and the blueberries perfectly represented the forests and local agricultures of Quebec and the Maritimes. But I also added yerba buena to give it a little bit of mint fresh flavor from the Caribbean. So here's the recipe. In this case, 1.5 ounces of 1769 Distillery Canadian whiskey, a half ounce of sweet maple Canadian whiskey, 1 to 2 ounces of lime lemon mix, and 1 tablespoon of fresh blueberries, or around maybe 8 blueberries to muddle. Then add the ice. In a cocktail shaker, gently crush the fresh blueberries to release their juices, combine with the mint and the yerba buena. Add the 1769 Canadian whiskey, sweet maple Canadian whiskey, and the lemon lime mix to the shaker. Fill with ice, shake vigorously for 10-15 seconds until thoroughly chilled. Double strain the mixture into a chill cocktail glass to keep blueberry chunks out of the drink. And then drop a few blueberries and a few yerba buena leaves. This drink exists because of everything we've talked about today, not because cod belongs in a cocktail. Thankfully, it doesn't, but because the ingredients tell the same story the ships told. Canadian whiskey or maple represented Atlantic Canada, the mint and the citrus representing the Caribbean. Because every great Atlantic port smelled of citrus, spice, wood, salt, sea air, today, this isn't just a cocktail. It's a toast to one ocean that connected two very different worlds. When we planned this trip, I packed cameras, batteries, lenses, a drone, comfortable walking shoes, because we did walk a lot. I expected incredible scenery, historic cities, fresh seafood. What I didn't pack was the expectation that I would spend the next several months researching Puerto Rican history, because that's exactly what happened. Every place I visited kept leading me back home. Halifax wasn't just Halifax. It became part of San Juan's history. Corner Brook wasn't simply another beautiful Canadian town. It became part of Puerto Rico's culinary history. Charlottetown wasn't only the birth of Canadian Confederation. It became part of Puerto Rico's constitutional conversation. Even my DNA ended up asking historical questions I wasn't expecting to ask. That is why travel matters. Not because it shows us new places, because it teaches us new ways to understand the places we already know. I think that's what surprised me the most. I went looking for Canadian history. Instead, I kept finding Puerto Rico. Standing in Halifax, I wasn't simply looking at another country. I was looking at one end of a story, whose other end reaches all the way to Puerto Rico. Standing in Corner Brook, it wasn't simply looking at Newfoundland. I was looking at the beginning of 1,000 voyages that eventually helped shape Puerto Rican kitchens. Sometimes, history isn't separated by oceans. Sometimes, history is connected by them. If there's one thing I'd like you to remember after watching today's episode, is this. History doesn't happen inside borders. History happens where people meet, where ships arrive, where ideas are exchanged, where cultures influence one another, where ordinary people build extraordinary connections without even realizing it. That's exactly what happened here. Canada's East Coast didn't become part of Puerto Rico's history by accident. And Puerto Rico didn't become part of Canada's history by accident either. The Atlantic made sure of that. And if you enjoyed today's episode, I'd really appreciate your support. Subscribe if you haven't already. Become a channel member. Or leave us a super thanks if you'd like to help fund future research and travel. Every membership helps make episodes like this possible. So, next time you sit down to enjoy bacalaitos, serenata de bacalao, or bacalao guisao, remember, you're tasting much more than cod. You're tasting centuries of commerce, generations of fishermen, merchant captains crossing dangerous seas, families building lives, political ideas crossing oceans, and one remarkable connection between Canada's East Coast and Puerto Rico. A connection that most of us never learned in school, but one that has been hiding in plain sight all along. I'm Josue, the spirited historian. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next Sunday. Until then, as always, be good, be nice, have fun, hey, get smart, read a lot, travel, go to church, and salud.
Dale, dale. That children who have severe disabilities.